intentionally came outside for this, so there might be noises like barking dog.
The dog's part of the ecosystem and we welcome him. My cat's here too. So welcome, Finian. It's a true honor to speak with you because I watched a preview of your movie, Kiss the Ground, made by your organization, Kiss the Ground, and it literally changed my life. And now I'd like to move to a farm and learn about regenerative agriculture. So would you please introduce a little bit about yourself and the organization and your journey with regenerative farming for those who may not know about this concept?
Great. Thank you, Nat, for having me. We don't have that much time, so I'm going to try to be brief here. So Kiss the Ground was born about 7 years ago. Myself and the other co-founder, Ryland, really had epiphany moments, maybe similar to what you had, where we were both avid environmentalists, working inside of our communities. And I was in music, he was in restaurants, and it was just like, oh, we're doing our best to help the world in the little ways we think is possible, but generally living a pretty apathetic life in terms of thinking, humans, can we actually do it? And we didn't really think that was possible. And Ryland just happened to be in New Zealand and heard this panel of scientists talking about, can humans sustain themselves on planet Earth? And lo and behold, the first 5 said, no, we can't really. And the 6 said, everything they said is true, but we have forgotten, or we have lost sight of, a huge potential ally, which is the soil. And that awoke in Ryland a potential, oh my goodness, this is something that I had never heard before. And so he convinced this gentleman named Graham Sate to stop in Los Angeles and speak to a group of us. So we set up a little auditorium, and 4 hours later, my life changed forever. And I had a pretty significant soil biology and biology background, working when I was in high school with Cornell University back in New York. And the things that Graham told us in that lecture were so mind-blowing. And I thought I knew most of what there was to know about climate change, about desertification. And here was this idea that was so big that I had the moment of, wait a minute, if I didn't know, probably most people in the world don't know. And it wasn't like I thought I was better. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I'm of the people who know most of the things that's going on. And here's this big idea that I was just completely clueless about. So that night we actually went back to Ryland's house and we shook hands and we said, if this is all true, we have to dedicate our lives to spreading the word about this, because there's nothing bigger that honestly can help humanity out of these crises. Because at that point, to me, there was no solution that really matched the significance of the problems that we're facing. And it's when you look at how fast we're heading off the cliff on any spectrum, whether it's water security, food security, desertification, biodiversity loss, extinction, any of these facets, global warming, how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, it's catastrophic. And this was the only solution that really held its weight to be able to go up against those major catastrophes. So Kiss the Ground was born off of that moment. And we said, whatever, we didn't know we were going to be a nonprofit. We didn't know what we were, but we knew every week we would meet, and we did. And we just dedicated our lives to spreading this message. So that was the birth of Kiss the Ground, was that soil can be this amazing ally. If we take the carbon that's in the atmosphere and we use it, this excess carbon that's causing problems, and we use it to build soil, which I'll explain more in a second. If we use that carbon to build soil, we can solve the climate crisis, we can solve drought, we can solve flooding, we can solve desertification, we can solve biodiversity loss. So many of these things exist because of healthy soil, right? The land is healthy when soil is healthy. So if you rebuild healthy soil, all of a sudden the systems start working again, and it's all based on carbon. Carbon is the pump of what makes life work. And we'll talk about that more in a second. But that's the origin of Kiss the Ground, was we can do this. Humanity can actually turn a corner and go a different direction. And that was it. That was what set us ablaze, was that we can do this. This was the big idea, and this was the big aha. Yeah.
Well, it is a revolutionary idea. And like you said, it's crazy that not more people know about it. And I don't even think people, I know I myself wasn't aware of the problem, let alone the solution. Now, not to be, not to depress everybody out there, but can you give us some quick hard facts on the current state of our soil and the degradation we are facing?
Yeah. So every year, an area the size of England is lost to land that was once being used for agriculture or ranching or farming is lost to degradation, meaning it's too degraded, depleted, destroyed by chemicals or what have you, or salts, too destroyed to use, even with chemicals that we're helping prop it up with. So an area the size of England every year is lost around the world to soil degradation. And in the United States, on average, we lose 4 tons of topsoil per acre per year. That's, imagine 4 pickup trucks pulling into a suburban yard, right? That's about an acre, filling 4 pickup trucks full of the topsoil, the rich, dark, good stuff, and shipping it off. That's our average rate of soil loss per acre per year in the United States. And I ask everyone, I implore you to go to Google Earth. Now that you've heard about soil and you've heard about how we're destroying the world very quickly, just start looking at Google Earth and seeing how much of the world is turning to desert. It's beyond alarming.
Now, regenerative farming feels like a new exciting concept, but it's not, right? It's ancient, and it's actually our birthright and how our ancestors farmed. Can you give us a little bit more about the history lesson? How did we get so disconnected to the ecosystem? And was there a time when we were living in sync with nature? Actually, just let me throw in my favorite fact, which is that science is now proving that tribes in the Amazon helped to build the rainforest, and they very specifically cultivated parts of it. So humans have known how to live regeneratively on this earth. Can you please tell us how we got here?
It's a great question. And just to be totally real with everyone, most societies across the globe have farmed or produced our food and our fibers in a degenerative way. From Europe to the Middle East to Africa to many parts of Asia, most cultures have been destructive. Over the 10,000 years that humans have been farming, we have been causing the ecosystems to be able to carry less because of how we've treated the soil. So think about the deserts across the world. Sorry, there's a plane going over. Almost every single desert has been caused by humans, either through overgrazing, tilling, using up the land, okay?
Let's just pause for this helicopter because this is too important. This is where modernity doesn't always serve us. Okay. Please resume.
No problem. Sorry, we're doing this outside. I'm getting cold too, so I'm gonna try to stay warm here. It just dropped temperature like 10 degrees. So when we look at deserts all across the world, most every single one was caused by humans. In many cases, it was humans overgrazing with their animals, with their sheep, with their goats, with cows. Many times in areas, it was because of tilling and over-tilling the soil. Now, really quick lesson here. In environments that are brittle, meaning for a period of the year, it doesn't rain very much or at all, and the air becomes very dry or not moist. In those environments, which are most of the world, just a little fact, 2/3 of the world are grasslands. So that means they're usually grasslands are areas in the world that are brittle environments, because grasses can actually co-evolve in brittle environments better than trees. Trees need more moisture. So these areas that you see grasslands are usually brittle environments. Now, when we start doing agriculture, tilling, overgrazing in brittle environments, those environments can't regenerate fast enough to keep up with humans' degeneration of them. So really quick anecdote is when colonization happened, when you had Europeans going across the world, especially the English going across the world, such as Australia, for example, when they moved in there, assuming their agriculture to be superior, they started implementing their agricultural practices in one of the most brittle, fragile environments on Earth very quickly. In a book called Call of the Reed Warbler, Charles Macy really puts this part of history into context. And I know, Nat, you mentioned another book where they do this too, where you have accounts of places that were very fertile, really rich soils, these people saying, oh my gosh, we came to this land and we're just unbelievably amazed at the abundance here. Within 3 years, you see the next account in their journal, everything's destroyed. It's because of how they're grazing, because of how they were doing practices, agricultural practices that they were doing in England. Now, if anyone has been to England, it's a very constantly moist environment. So it's a very forgiving environment for degenerative farming practices. So if you farm in England and you till and you overgraze, the land responds really fast and regenerates because there's constant moisture. You go to Australia and you do the same practices, bam, you've lost your grasses within the course of a year or two. So
and may I add, 300 years later, you end up with the most devastating fires that country has ever witnessed. So exactly. This has having major implications. I just had to add that because I'm still traumatized and people want to say arson. This has a lot to do with our degenerative farming practices, which are not suitable for the Australian land. So I love that the not one size fits all approach you're talking about.
Yeah. So looking at brittle and non-brittle environments is really important. You look at California. Here I am in California. How many people I know will be like, oh, we're in a desert. They drive up the 5, which is our big highway going through the state, and they look around them and they see California. But they're like, do you realize that you are driving through what once was one of the most expansive wetlands on this side of the Mississippi? I mean, people not comprehending historically what something was is a big problem. So we need to address that collectively as humanity. Say, okay, hold on. What did this used to be like before we killed all the beavers, before we took out all these areas, before we drained these wetlands, before we allowed our sheep and goats to overgraze, and then the erosion started happening from the hillsides, before we took out all the trees? We need to take ourselves back there and look at how that ecosystem functioned, how water cycled through it, how water infiltrated and recharged aquifers. When we look historically, over the last 400 years in this country or so, we can see a dramatic decline in how the ecosystems are functioning, especially when it comes to water. I could go on and on, obviously, but anyway, so I wanted to say, just to put it in there, is most of the societies of the world, archaeologically, if you look at them, have been degenerative. They deteriorate the land and then the populations decline too. And then there's a little regeneration because there's less people, and then it happens again when the population goes up. There are a few exceptions. In the United States, we had some cultures here doing some amazing work to regenerate the landscape, farm within an ecosystem and help it function better. Some of that was happening with the Aboriginals in Australia. Some of that was happening in the Amazon. Some of that's happened in certain parts of Asia. And some of that's happened in certain parts of Europe. So there are pockets and places where people have been helping the land function better, but majority of humans to create our food have been living in this degenerative way. We beat up the land, we use it, and that's why most people will leave land fallow. They'll let it rest for a little while so that it can rebound and regenerate, and then we'll use it again and beat it up again. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, because it's important not to idealize that all of our ancestors knew what they were doing. But it is exciting to know that there are, like you said, pockets of people who have been able to farm within their ecosystem specifically. So that just blew my mind, the visual of driving up the 5, because I've done that drive and it's a dust bowl, it's desert. The thought that used to be wetlands. So you're saying that regenerative farming... Some of it. Okay. You're saying that regenerative farming could potentially bring places like that back? And Can you talk a little bit about how that works and the difference between, some people may not know the difference between modern farming and regenerative farming. So
I'll do a quick breakdown.
Okay.
So really quick, we talk about regenerative agriculture as being a combination of ancient indigenous wisdom So things that people have learned from the place they are, how to help, right? This is stuff that's embedded. It's not scientific necessarily. It's just what has culturally worked, and people have evolved. They've learned their lessons, hardship or not. Then there's these cutting edge pioneer thinkers in holistic thinking. People who've around the world come around and said, wait a minute, we're thinking totally wrong. Our mechanical siloed thinking is destroying us. Some of these pioneer holistic thinkers. And then on top of that, so we have this third part of it, which is the science. How soil actually is built and the revelations we have inside of that. Now, the one of the more exciting pieces to a lot of people in the modern world is the scientific part, because they're still pushing aside the ancient wisdom and the holistic thinking. But when you give them the science of, wait a minute, here we go. Regenerative farming, and this is the way I simplify it. Make it simple. Regenerative farming is acting as if the soil is alive and needs to be fed constantly carbon from the atmosphere. Conventional degenerative farming is treating the soil as if it's an inert substance that holds plants up so that they can grow. Now, when you look at the regenerative side, that context makes you see, when you see bare ground on a farm, what you realize you're seeing is a plant. Pretend my hand's a plant, right? Plants take carbon from the atmosphere into their leaves. They suck in carbon dioxide and they break off the carbon and they combine it with the hydrogen and oxygen that they get from water, H2O, right? They make carbohydrates. You know how you tap a tree and it has sap in it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You break it, it's liquid. That's a liquid sugar that the plant makes from carbon from the atmosphere, right? Photosynthesis, we learn that, and then it spits out oxygen for us to breathe. But what most of us don't conceptualize is that the plant is actually building itself. All that wood, if you tap on a tree, came from carbon from the air. So it came into there and built its whole structure out of the carbon from thin air. Now, what we didn't know was how much the plant, maybe I can pull, this is just a cactus, but I'll just grab it just for fun. Okay, so this is dusty, pardon it, but imagine this plant here. This plant is pumping carbon out of its roots. So the big news flash is that plants share 30% or 40% of that liquid sugar, that sap, right? They push it out of their roots. They sweat it out, little drip, 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 to feed microbes in the soil. Those microbes live and die and they grow and they create glues. But those microbes are made out of carbon, and their glues are made out of carbon, and they glue the soil particles together, making rich, aggregated, carbon-filled soil. So healthy soil is built mostly by plants pumping in carbon out of the roots. And this is what we didn't know. They feed the microbes like the fungi and bacteria. Most of us think about soil as like just things fall to the ground, they decompose, and they mix with the top of the soil. Yeah, that's how soil is built. But that's only in a fraction, because most of that stuff just decomposes very quickly and turns back into CO2. About 90% of that stuff just quickly turns back into CO2. But the stuff that the plants are pumping out of their roots to feed the microbes more quickly becomes stable humus or soil organic matter. So this is the big scientific revelation that's really allowing this idea to emerge as, oh my gosh, what if our farming is helping to pump carbon into the ground all the time? So regenerative agriculture, no tilling. When you till the ground, you break up all those carbon aggregates and you put the carbon back into the atmosphere. You don't leave your land bare. All that bare ground you see when you see farmland, that is something that's terrible. We're not pumping carbon in, we're only having carbon go out. So when we overgraze land, when we make it so that there's bare pockets because the animals pull too much of the plants out, that means that there's no carbon being pumped into the ground. So when we put chemicals on the ground, when we spray our plants with chemicals or spray the ground with chemicals, we're killing the bacteria and the fungi and all the other organisms in the soil food web who are helping to store that carbon in the ground. And so more CO2 goes up and less goes in, and on and on. So there's a myriad of things that you can see now as an advocate: tilling, bare ground, chemical spraying, overgrazing, and a myriad of others. So you can start to identify degenerative agriculture. Remember I said 4 tons of topsoil per acre per year is being lost? That's because
Wow.
we're degrading our land so that it's not stable and it runs off the land through wind and water erosion. So last really quick, counter that. When you have bare ground, you do cover crops instead. So you grow crops all year round, even if they're not your selling crop, the crop you're going to sell. You do a mix of species of crops so that you pump the carbon in and you protect your soil. Instead of tilling, you do no-till. Instead of doing overgrazing, you do planned grazing, which is mimicking how the wild buffalo herds move around the land, and it regenerates the land very quickly. Instead of chemicals, you use things like compost, right? So these are some ways that we are implementing regenerative agriculture on a massive scale. Yeah.
I love that. And I love how you said, like, the cover crops, they're not for sale, they're for the earth. And I think it's really about shifting the mindset, you know, this like profit at all costs farming mindset has got us into the trouble that we're in. And we have to start putting the soil and the planet first before profit. And and what I love about Kiss the Ground film is that it shows how responsive farmers are, because this is actually helpful to them, because it actually ends up increasing like yields, right? So it does end up being profitable.
Not just yields, but profits.
Profit, yeah.
What you were saying is that the soil gets destroyed. What happens? Your input costs have to go up. As you degrade your soil, you have to increase how much you're propping up your system with the chemicals. So farmers every year are paying more. So in terms of profits, actually, we're saying this is more profitable because every year your input costs go down as your soil fertility goes up. So that's what we're seeing is actually the savings, the input cost savings are a huge reason that profits happen for farmers who are turning to regenerative agriculture.
That is such good news when we're trying to pitch this idea to people. Okay, so now there might be some people thinking, okay, well, how does this concern me? You know, I'm not a farmer. I don't ever look at farms or soil. And but we all eat food, and that food is grown somewhere. So can you speak a little bit about how the degraded soil in which we are growing our food is leading to the degradation of our collective health? And I just want to throw out a fact out for viewers. Americans last year spent $31 billion on multivitamins and supplements because we're being rightly told that our food does not contain the micronutrients we need because the soil is degraded. What boggles my mind is that we don't put that money into, you know, fixing the soil. But can you please connect the dots for people, because I'm sure that some people might not know how this is affecting our personal health, and in these times of corona there's nothing more important than our personal and collective health.
Yeah. So remember I mentioned how the plant is pumping sugar into the ground to feed the microbes? Yeah. It's not just doing that for fun. It's doing that because the microbes are responsible. All those microbiology in one healthy teaspoon of soil, you can have more microorganisms than there are people on the planet. Wow. So imagine a healthy teaspoon of soil hosting more organisms than there are people on the planet. Why that's so important is the plant is pumping sugar into the ground to feed those microorganisms. It's an exchange because those microorganisms are accessing the minerals and the water that the plant needs. So what I mean by that is when you have minerals in the soil, let's say you have some sand or silt or clay, whatever your base material is, to access those minerals, many trace minerals, to acquire them, for a plant to acquire them, they actually have to go through an organism. So unless you have the organism in there, you will be eating a tomato or a strawberry that does not have the micronutrient in it. And our bodies need many micronutrients to thrive. So when I ask people to imagine that tomato or that strawberry or that some vegetable that they're like, this tastes amazing. That's your tongue telling you something. That's millions of years of evolution telling you that's got good stuff in it. And what I mean, why that's so important, is that healthy soil that's teeming with all the life, that's the stuff that's allowing the plant roots to absorb those essential micronutrients that actually make the food healthy. So you're saying, oh, we're investing all this money into the health, and people are, you know, buying vitamins and all this other stuff. When you have food that can actually act as your vitamin supply because the soil was healthy enough, the microorganisms made all those trace minerals, you can taste it. And I don't want to just tell people that to go out and just only taste only use your tongue as your parameter, but generally when you're tasting something that's full of flavor, it's your tongue telling you that it's got the minerals and nutrients in it. Unless it's like fake sugar, right? It's not, I'm talking about real food, real products, tasting really good. Your tongue's actually telling you that they're healthy, full of nutrients. So the irony, we talked about it earlier before, is that we're spending all this money over here to make ourselves healthy, but that's such a short-term solution. What we look at is, wait, we could actually build the ecosystem of the soil back, and all of a sudden our food would be our minerals and nutrients that we need. And our bodies are designed to absorb those anyway, because a lot of the things we put in our bodies, pardon my language, is not very digestible or usable by our bodies to begin with, but food is. Yeah.
So soil could not only help the climate crisis by sequestering carbon, but it could fix our global health crisis, is what you're saying? Just trying to make it real easy for people to understand.
100%. I mean, when we look at what is grown in most of our soils and how it's grown, I implore more people to go to farms and see the difference. Go visit a biodynamic farm or an let's just say biodynamic, because some organic farms are terribly farmed also. But start to go to farms that have healthy soils. If people are home from COVID right now, order from a farmer. There's a lot of farmers who are now going direct for meat, for produce. You can start doing the CSA box. And if you start to look for biodynamic or organic and start to find out about that farmer, start to, if you're going to purchase from them, you have the right to say, hey, what soil health practices are you all implementing? And then find a CSA that is doing that. And all of a sudden you'll start to taste the difference. I guarantee you that if you start to say, okay, we ordered this food and we had it delivered, or we went to the supermarket and we just got general conventional this or that, versus this known farm for biodynamic or one of these ways that is farming more regeneratively, you're going to taste the difference, and you're going to know that it's the soil health that was the main thing.
And you're going to feel the difference because you're actually getting the micronutrients that you were designed to get from food and not from a bottle.
Yep.
So thank you for that. So I want to ask, okay, so there also may be some people who just are living in an urban center. They don't have access. Their nearest farm is a long way away. How can people start who are not necessarily going to be able to dive into regenerative farming tomorrow? How can people start to incorporate these practices into their lives and things that we can start doing now and embodying more of a regenerative mindset and consciousness, and show people that you don't have to live on a farm to start?
Yeah. I encourage folks to start working on thinking regeneratively, we call it, just because I know personally, I didn't know about this. I didn't know how the soil really worked, even though I was, educated, probably given many more opportunities to understand this than a normal person. But I didn't really get it. And once I started going down this pathway, you start to see this concept of regeneration. And the way I encourage folks to do it is to put it in context, meaning, what does degenerative mean? That's our current way of being, whether it's our health, generally, I'm talking about the whole big population, our health, the ecosystem health, and our farm health. We're in a degenerative relationship, constantly degrading, and our bodies are in chronic stress, and we're dealing with all those ramifications. Now, then there's sustainable, which is this option that's been floated by everyone from the UN to most people in charge. Let's sustain what we currently have. But if you look at the crisis that we currently have, whether it's human health, on-farm health, entire ecosystem health, watershed health, blah, 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 sustaining that is kind of crazy, especially if regeneration is an option. And that comes with human health. If our bodies are trying to regenerate, they're working at that, and our ecosystems are trying to regenerate, and our farm systems are trying to regenerate and heal themselves, humans being this steward of the earth is possible. We call it a keystone species for regeneration. So humans starting to step in and say, wait a minute, we can, whether it's in our backyard, helping that carbon pump, helping make healthy soil, we can start to make these choices, creating food that doesn't have to be shipped miles and miles. So whether you're planting tomatoes or zucchini, I just had a bunch of zucchini yesterday from my garden. It was awesome. whether you're doing something that's helping your body regenerate, or your backyard, or you're supporting a farmer who is making these differences, this is about you, Nat. I know you're jumping in, and so many other people saying, you know what? I don't want to be stuck, and it makes me emotional sometimes, but I don't want to be stuck in this place we're in. I mean, we're going off a cliff. We're going to turn our world into a desertified mess, and the catastrophes that are going to come 10 years from now if we don't change the direction are so crazy. I mean, if you think it's bad now with refugees and this and that, we got another thing coming. And the good news is that every one of us can help to have this movement get and become a global phenomenon when we shift gears and go to regenerative. So what I'm saying is, start to think about yourself, your community, and the sourcing of your food as how you can be a player in how that's going to become more regenerative. And start thinking regeneratively. Trust me, it's fun, it's exhilarating. You start to see what's possible, and you start to see that nature is the best designer of everything, because she's been working on this for millions and billions of years to have things work more efficiently and make abundance all over the place. That's what nature does, is make abundance, and we've just been fighting against it and dismantling it. So it's possible, and honestly, I was an activist for most of my life, fighting against, and I encourage people to step into this and work for and become a part of this regenerative phenomenon. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I can speak to the exhilaration you feel when you start to step into a more regenerative mindset and start to work in co-creation with nature. Just the other day, I was pruning back a tree, and I was apologizing to the tree because it hurt me to prune it a little bit, although that's helping the tree grow more. But the joy that I felt knowing that I was saving the branches to put in my compost pile, and I was telling the tree, with your branches, I'm going to create really nutrient-rich soil, and we're going to grow some pollinator plants with it. And I'm 35 years old, and it was this new and beautiful world that I feel like I'm just discovering now, of finally being able to live, like you said, working with nature and not always fighting against. And so on that note, because we do have to wrap up, can you give us one tip? And I'm just going to ask you, actually, can you just tell everybody how to start with composting at home to end on this note? Because we got to make soil sexy again, and this is how you do it from your own house.
Totally. Sure. I just want to give a really quick plug to Kiss the Ground.
Oh, yes, of course.
We're designed as an organization to help. Our mission is inspiring participation in soil regeneration, whether that's politicians working in policy for the state of California or federally. Sorry, I got a helicopter here. Or whether that's individual advocates being trained. We'll let it pass real fast. We have two major programs. One of them is our stewardship program. So we train people to be soil advocates, to be regenerative gardeners, to be inside of their own businesses, converting their supply chain. And then we have a program called our Farmland program, where we are helping train farmers all over the US and soon to be the world in regenerative agriculture. We put them through 3-year training programs, ongoing training with soil testing, and they're getting training from the best, if not, the world's best, some of these trainers in regenerative agriculture, who are also stars of the Kiss the Ground movie that's coming out. So we're really excited about it, and our platform is designed so that anyone can get involved. You can go to kisstheground.com and find your path at the Find Your Path tool, and that'll give you suggestions of how to start immediately and get involved in this amazing movement. It's truly amazing what's happening around the world, and people are getting involved in all different fronts, whether it's their human health that they're interested in, biodiversity loss, or farming, or what have you. There's a myriad of ways that you can get involved and help spread this message. But composting. So
wait, but you can take the soil advocacy course from anywhere in the world, right?
That we have a new one coming from anywhere in the world. There's not one happening today right now, but there will be one, I think, at the end of August. There'll be the next one starting. but yeah, we have trained about 2,500 people from all over 25 different countries around the world in being soil advocates. So we want to empower you to do your part the way you like to do it. So compost. Today I just sorted this compost, took out some of the big chunks that weren't decomposing, but this is some finished compost. If you can see here, it's beautiful. The plants love it, especially if you're transplanting new plants. But I have some basics for compost, and you can watch the compost story at kisstheground.com, a film we made with some great celebs and stuff. But number one trick, put your receptacle in your freezer so that you don't have any fruit flies and you don't have your slimy, gooky stuff that will happen if you let your highly nitrogen-rich material on your counter sit and compact, and it creates anaerobic and it starts to smell bad. So put that in the freezer so that's the starting point. Number two, either make with some chicken wire or what have you, or get one of those black bins. I can take you, hopefully my internet stays connected here. I'll just take you over to my compost. Here's my garden going. It's just my compost all the time. So this is my lettuce. So and here's a new bed that's going in here, protecting from some of the bugs. So here's my compost situation right here. So I have one of these black bins. This is pretty easy to do because, it just makes things simpler and it stays in place. But this is one of the most important things that people often forget. This is your side bin. If you see in here, I have my dried leaves. That's my side bin, because when I put my compost in, when I take my frozen compost and I throw it on top, if I'm gonna have a low fly population, every time I put my compost in, so I plop my compost in there, and then I take some of my dried leaves and I put them on top. And that's what nature does. That's what animals do. They keep the flies down and stuff like that. And then I go and fill up the container with water and I put that over top to keep it moist. So that's how you can create a very flyless compost, and the rich compost you'll get at the end. If you ever have issues with flies or it's smelling bad, just stir it up a little bit with a pitchfork or a stick, and that'll make it so some of those clumps of decomposing material don't end up continuing to anaerobically digest, meaning not enough air is circulating underneath there. So that's a little quick lesson for composting. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. So should it stay moist the whole time? It shouldn't dry out?
It should always be moist until this stage. It should always be moist. I want to do a little show, just telling people, even if you don't compost, just try this for me. All your organics, all your choppings or whatever, put them in a ramekin in your freezer and just watch how quickly it fills up. And you'll be appalled at how much organic material you've been throwing into the landfill that's creating methane gas and contributing to global warming. You'll just be like, I can't believe that's a week's worth of compost. I should be composting. Hopefully that'll get done.
Yeah, guys, please don't throw your food in the trash, especially now that you know that you could be creating nutrient-rich soil, which we all need. Well, thank you very much. I will be signing up. I've been waiting for the new soil advocacy course, so I hope watchers will join me in August, and I hope we get those numbers up all around the world, and so we can spread the word and the work that you are doing. It's been an honor to speak to you, Finian. Thank you so much, and hope to connect with you again soon.
Totally. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, and wait, when does the movie come out?
The movie, we're working on some distribution deals, but soon. And that's something people can do, is they can go on the website and they can commit to helping the promotion of the film. So go watch the trailer and then, sign up so you can be one of those people all over the world who's helping to promote the movie, do screenings, etc. So.